It's pretty good.
Are you on?
Yeah, I am now.
Yep. Well, I think that's because yours is saying it's working. That might be my phone because I have T-Mobile and I have really bad service. That's just a black screen. I think that's my phone doing that. Oh, there you go.
I sort of pissed him off. He did 4 jobs for 2 years. So I went down to Wentz. I wasn't sure enough to work. He was the Walker Nest.
If everyone please rise to recite pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to do roll call.
Warren Reiner?
Yes.
Roger Meckes?
Yes.
Scott? Tom Cross?
Yes.
Dan Willis? John DeSatis?
Yes.
William Miller?
No.
William English? Chris Rao?
Absent.
Stacy Benitotis? Attorney Nanovic?
Here.
Okay, I just have a few little things I want to say before we start. We're going to start at 7, which is 7 now. 9 o'clock, we are going to adjourn this meeting. So we have 2 full hours. And as of right now, our solicitor, Tom Nanovic, is going to take over the meeting from here on.
Thank you, Butch. Welcome, everybody. This is a special meeting / zoning workshop. And the purpose of the meeting this evening is to discuss those provisions in the current zoning ordinance which address wind turbines. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about how this came about. Several months ago, probably the fall of 2017, some of the residents, and I know Marcus Lawrence was one of them, came to the Board of Supervisors and said, the current zoning provisions that we have regarding wind turbines are antiquated. And I think the last time we amended them was 2011. And he said they could be better than they are and we need to update them. So the Board of Supervisors agreed. We, the Board of Supervisors, myself, and our Planning Commission, we didn't have the knowledge or the expertise to make those amendments. So the board retained Charlie Schmel from, I want to get it right, Urban Research and Development Corporation. He's a land use planner, to look at our current ordinance and to draft any amendments which he felt were appropriate. And we really didn't give him any direction in doing that. We kind of left it up to him because he has the expertise. And for those of you who have a copy of the proposed amendments, that is what, I think they're dated December 5th, 2017. That's what Charlie drafted. What I'm going to do, when I'm done speaking, what I'm going to do is ask Mr. Schmel to go through the amendments, explain them to you, and I would ask that you withhold any questions or comments until he goes through all of the amendments, and he may answer some of your questions, and we may all learn something. I have not, personally, I haven't discussed these with Charlie. I got him back in December. I haven't discussed them at all, so it'll be a learning experience for me also. One of the things I would point out is that this is only a draft, and in fact, I was thinking as I prepared for the meeting this evening, it's a first draft. What Charlie sent us on December 5th is what we have. Like I said, I have not gone back and forth with him and said, gee, we need to do this or that. This is just the first draft. Nothing's written in stone. There's no reason for anybody to get upset tonight or anything like that. Again, the purpose of this workshop is to discuss this draft and to get your input and your comments, and hopefully we'll all learn something this evening. Charlie mentioned to me that even after this evening, I'm not sure whether we're going to have any more workshops. I guess it depends on how this goes this evening. But he pointed out to me that even if you don't comment tonight, feel free to send your comments in written form to the township. We will be looking at all the comments we get, and we really do appreciate them because, like I said, we don't have the expertise. That's why we hired Charlie, and we'll learn something from you, and hopefully we'll all learn something from Charlie. One of the things I want to point out,
just a curious question, if this was dated December the 5th, why are we only getting a copy of it now? What's the
yeah, we're gonna again, I'm gonna ask that you withhold your questions because we only have 2 hours, and honestly, that's not a heck of a lot of time. I don't know that we're gonna get this done this evening. I don't want to get held up on that sort of thing. What I was going to explain was this is not. Some of you may have gone to some of the zoning hearings. This is not a hearing. This is a regular or a special meeting, a zoning workshop. No one's going to be sworn in. There's not going to be any testimony. If you look around, you won't see a court reporter or a stenographer. There's not going to be any cross-examinations or anything like that. Again, this is just a meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission to go over these particular amendments, proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance. One of the things that I want to make clear, these amendments and this meeting tonight is not to discuss any particular application, whether current, pending, or otherwise. This meeting tonight and the proposed zoning ordinances is not directed towards any particular applicant or any particular piece of property. We're here to discuss the amendments as they apply overall throughout the township. Now, having said that, those of you who have attended hearings and done homework, done work on the internet and things like that, no doubt have learned things about wind turbines, probably more than I know myself. And you're probably aware of some of the issues we may have with our zoning ordinance. You're probably aware of some deficiencies that you learned through the hearings. And you might have learned some things that are strengths in our ordinance. We would ask that you share those things with us. But again, we're not here to discuss a particular application. The amendments that we're discussing now are not going to apply to the current or pending application. These are amendments that are going to the zoning ordinance and applications that perhaps in the future may come through for wind turbine farms. These would apply to, but they do not apply to the current, anything that's going on right now that's been applied for, whether before the Court of Common Pleas or the Zoning Hearing Board. These amendments would not apply to those applications. Again, I would ask that you withhold your questions until we're done. Thank you. We are going to address all your questions. And like I said, 2 hours is just not a lot of time. I really don't know how long this is going to take, but I suspect it's not going to get done in 2 hours. I don't think at the end of the meeting this evening we're going to say, gee, we have a perfect document, we're all in agreement, let's enact it. I don't expect that to happen. And again, 2 hours is not a long time, but I want to be kind of quick so I can turn over to Charlie because he's much more important in this than I am. One of the questions I do want to address that came up, and Charlie asked me to specifically address this, is why do we permit certain uses in the township? There's certain uses that people would simply not want in any municipality, or many people would prefer not to have, like adult bookstores, landfills, quarries, and things like that. Why do municipalities permit them when they have adverse effects on people and they can be intrusive on people's lives? In Pennsylvania, if a zoning ordinance excludes or does not permit a legitimate use, the ordinance is subject to challenge as being unconstitutional. In my experience, the way these uses like landfills, quarries, wind turbines, adult bookstores, things like that are somewhat intrusive and have adverse consequences, the way they're normally addressed, again, in my experience, they're addressed through the special exceptions as we address wind turbines in our ordinance, or conditional uses. And I think most municipal solicitors give that advice to the people, the boards they represent. And in working with several land use planners, in addition to Charlie, every land use planner that I work with sort of addresses it the same way, that some of these adverse uses or intensive uses are addressed not simply by permitting them, and certainly not by just denying them, because again, that leaves your ordinance up to challenge as being unconstitutional. But permitting them as conditional uses or special exceptions, and I think Charlie agrees with what I just said, and the amendments he drafted, he's treating them as special exceptions. Charlie actually drafted the ordinance that we currently have in effect. One other thing, and I'm going to take 3 minutes, 4 minutes, to explain the procedure on how a zoning ordinance gets adopted. Once we get to a text, an amendment that the Board of Supervisors is comfortable that this is what we're going to adopt, once that happens, we have that down in writing, whether Charlie does it or I do, and we go, okay, we're happy. This is the amendment to the ordinance we're going to adopt. It gets sent to the Township Planning Commission and the County Planning Commission for a 30-day review period. And then they can comment on that back to the supervisors saying what they think about the proposed amendments. After that 30-day review period, the Board of Supervisors is required to have a public hearing. And that has to be advertised 2 times in the local newspaper. Typically advertised in the Times News. The Board of Supervisors would then have a public hearing at which you'd have an opportunity to come in and again state whether you're happy about the amendments or not happy about the amendments. If, after that public hearing, the board says, okay, this thing is still ready to be adopted, the next step is for the Board of Supervisors to put public notice in the newspaper that they're considering adopting the ordinance, and then usually at their next meeting or the meeting after that, at a public meeting, the ordinance would be adopted. That procedure, in my experience, from the time you have a draft of an ordinance that you're happy with until the time that the supervisors actually adopt it at a meeting, generally takes about 90 days. But I'm not saying that in 90 days we're going to have an ordinance, because at this point, as we sit here this evening, we don't have an ordinance that's ready to be adopted. And I would be very shocked if everybody gets up this evening and says, this is just a wonderful ordinance, let's make it happen. So that's the time period we're looking at it. And now I'll turn it over to Charlie again, Charlie's the one who drafted the amendments, and Charlie can explain and go over them. And again, I'd ask that you withhold your comments. We do intend to let everybody speak and ask questions. And if it takes more than one workshop, well, then it takes more than one workshop. Here you go, Charlie.
Thank you. We're limited by the length of the microphone cord, so I'm just going to sit down here instead of standing up. As Tom mentioned, the draft would send any wind turbine to the zoning hearing board for a decision as a special exception use. That would be continuing existing policy. The zoning hearing board has the ability to place reasonable conditions if they would decide to approve the use. So some of these items are aimed towards zoning hearing board conditions that would typically be addressed based upon the specifics of an application and the specifics of a site. There is a packet up here, if you didn't get a copy, that has the first draft of the amendment. And the italics shows you changes from the current draft. And I'll highlight them for you tonight. So in this case, we're talking about turbines that are not an accessory use. So we're not talking about backyard turbines. We're talking about multiple turbines on a property, particularly taller ones in most cases. Right now, the existing ordinance says that to the top of the extended blade to the ground, that height, that has to equal 3 times the setback from the nearest houses. the draft would increase that to 4 times. So if, for instance, you had a 450-foot high height to the top of the extended blade, that would require a 1/3 of a mile setback from the nearest house. So that's the first significant change that's being discussed. Right now, there is no maximum height. The height is limited by the setbacks. Whatever setback you can achieve, you can go that tall. There's concerns that height has major impacts upon aesthetics, view shed. So there was some consideration about setting a maximum height. The draft sets a maximum height of 450 feet, which would be a new standard. To give you some comparison, if you see the turbines, that's up to the top of the extended blade, by the way. If you see all the turbines in Schuylkill County, most of them are 425. So if you drive on 81, you see those turbines, it would be that comparable height. A new provision in B would add setbacks from creeks and reservoirs. Because of concerns about protecting water quality, there would now be a proposed 300-foot setback from any turbine to any creek or any reservoir, and that's a new provision that is proposed. The next provision, C, is already in place, and it says everything has to be removed in 12 months. From my readings, that's usually not a big item because the turbines, once they're normally used, actually still have a lot of market value. So they do want to remove them anyway, and the leases typically require them to be removed. But in any case, if it's no longer used for electricity, everything above ground has to be removed within 12 months. On the second page, I'm going to skip over the provisions that are not proposed for change. Those are the ones that are not italicized. The next most significant item is actually on the third page. So most of the second page is existing provisions. On the third page, there is concerns about how much woodland would be removed. Now, typically these types of operations only remove about 10% of the woodlands because they're mainly using the ridges. And they need a driveway to build the turbines and to maintain the turbines, but most of the land still stays wooded. And that's typically why water authorities in Schuylkill County and Carbon County and other parts of the country are receptive to them because most of the land is not disturbed. The new provision would say that they have to clearly show what areas of woodlands would be removed so that the township is not surprised and that item can be tied to an approval to make sure there's not unnecessary clearing, and that it cannot include more than 10% of the woodlands can be cleared. It may end up being 5% in some cases, but the proposed standard is a maximum of 10% clearance. Item P, noise, is certainly a controversial topic. Many of the model ordinances that are out there set a standard of 50 A-weighted decibels for maximum noise. The current ordinance says 45, so it's more restrictive than most of the model ordinances out there. 45 is a lot quieter than 50. It's called a logarithmic scale, so it's not simply a matter of 8% difference. In any case, we have some concerns that the township doesn't have a team of acoustic engineers on staff, so there's a limit of how far we can go to regulate every single conceivable type of noise. A-weighted decibels is what's commonly used in zoning because it most accurately covers what the human ear perceives. So you look at any zoning ordinance in the country, almost all of them use A-weighted decibels to measure noise. Rustling leaves can be about 45 decibels, A-weighted decibels. So that's the standard of 45 decibels. that's proposed in this draft. The key is setbacks. The bigger the setbacks, the more the noise gets buffered. Noise greatly falls with distance. Now, noise is also affected a little bit by wind. You know, if the wind pattern's going a certain way, the noise is going to be a little louder. And cloud cover can affect it too. But for the most part, the bigger the distance is, the bigger the setbacks, the less the noise. So there has to be a noise study. That's a new provision. There has to be independent testing of the noise. And there has to be follow-up studies. There's been some issues in some other parts of the country where turbines were not properly maintained. And they created more noise than was anticipated, more noise than when they were new. So by requiring periodic noise testing by an independent laboratory, we can make sure that people are maintaining the system to make sure the noise levels don't increase over time. Item R, there would have to be a hydrogeologic study. This would be a new provision. It would look at groundwater recharge and water quality and include recommendations that could be conditions on approval by an independent professional. This could include infiltration so that there's recharge into the ground. It could include best management practices to protect water quality, different things that can be done and can be included in a project. And often these things are also required by the conservation districts and by federal permit requirements. There would have, in S, there would have to be an analysis of impacts upon birds and bats by an independent qualified professional with recommendations for ways to minimize the impacts. From what I read, the main impacts is bats. And bats are very important to the ecological system. Less so, birds are less impacted by wind turbines, according to the numbers I've seen. So it is a concern, and from what I read, for instance, one of the things that professionals can recommend is not running the turbines during low wind speeds, because the bats actually are more vulnerable during low wind speeds. It throws off their sonar, as opposed to, and those are the times when the turbines aren't really less interested in running anyway, because they're not generating much electricity. So it's a type of situation where we're trying to set up a condition that could be negotiated by a zoning hearing board to address a concern with professional expert advice. The next one is shadow flicker. As you may have heard in hearings, shadow flicker is when the sunshine onto your property is affected by the blades and you're seeing flickering sunlight. Some people find that very annoying. Again, distance is the issue. The more distance between a home and the turbines, the less shadow flicker is an issue, because it's a matter of angles of the sun. So there have to be an analysis of that and looking at how many hours would be affected by shadow flickering at the most affected homes. On the last page, there would have to be a traffic study. Now, there's very little traffic after a wind farm's built. U is a common provision. It is common to allow wind turbines in combination with other uses. That's in zoning throughout the country. It is common to allow wind turbines in combination with water authority land. It's done, for instance, throughout Schuylkill County. It's done in western PA and other parts of the country.
So you're making it easier for them to put them up?
We're waiting for questions towards the end, please.
Yeah.
But that is a common zoning provision. That is not unusual by any means. Traffic studies, again, the traffic study issue is mainly during construction. So there have to be a professional traffic study as part of the zoning hearing board application. They would have to look at impacts on public roads, considering the length of the loads, the weight of the loads, the weight limits of the bridges, the geometry of the intersection, the angles of turning for trucks, the slope of the roads, and showing that they can be accommodated. What typically happens is if there is a problem, there might be a condition on the approval requiring that the applicant fund certain improvements to address it, such as intersection improvements or bonding improvements to a bridge or something of that nature. to deal with the issue, or bonding, so that if there is damage to a road, the applicant has to go back and fix it afterwards. Emergency response plan. There has occasionally been a fire in a turbine. They're not common, but it's happened. So there have to be a plan, working with the local volunteer fire company, being reviewed by them, and then cooperating with them to offer training on how to address it. Because there's no one typically in the turbine, often they let it burn because it's contained. It burns itself out. An appraiser. There would be a new requirement that there would have to be appraisal looking at the actual impacts upon residential property values of a similar set of turbines in a similar community, and looking at whether it affected property values in that situation of homes. And the last proposed new provision is the zoning hearing board may place conditions upon approval to address ice throw hazards, such as requiring mechanisms to sense heavy ice buildup, and which allow remote control or automatic shutdown of turbine blades. From what I've read and what I've heard talking to people, ice throw is mainly a concern for the employees. As long as you have enough setback, the ice throw is not going to affect the home. It's not going to travel a third of a mile. But you do have to be careful about ice throw for anyone under the turbines, and typically the industry tells their people not to be near the turbines when there's icy conditions. But there's ways that they can be minimized as a hazard, which is mentioned. That's an overview of what's in the draft amendment. Again, it is a first draft. We'd love to hear your comments and questions and suggestions. And let me turn it back over to Butch. Or did Tom get a call? Tom.
Yeah, we'll take comments and questions now. What I would ask, though, is that when you get up, if you could state your name, and I'm wondering, are they going to need the mic? You can't hear back there if I talk like this, can you?
You won't have any problem hearing it.
That's fine. If someone feels they can't speak loudly enough, or they can't hear them, then I would welcome.
It'd be better for them to come front and talk that way.
Just walk forward.
Okay, I was going to say I'd welcome them to use the microphone so that we all can hear what they're saying.
There's a roster.
So again, what Supervisor Reiner suggested is, why don't you come up front, make your comments, ask your questions, and sign the sheet also. That also helps Dana to keep good minutes of the meeting. So whoever wants to begin, come on up.
There's a fella coming up
Can
right
I
now.
make a suggestion, since Marcus actually
Bill, let them
submitted
speak- let them
the
speak
original
first. I'd rather-
changes, that we give him time to address his concerns?
Well, Bill, I want to let people speak and be heard and
Okay.
listen to them, and then certainly I have some comments and some suggestions.
This is Brian Whitney. That's me. I just have two questions. One refers to the maximum distance, that you're only saying it needs to be 4 times the distance. Well, with the experts that we heard and everything, the infrasound and everything can be heard for up to 2 miles. And why not make it 2 miles distance?
Why don't we do that? And Charlie, I don't know if that question I think is directed to you, but why don't you repeat the question? The question was, the setback is 4 times, correct me if I'm wrong when I say here, 4 times the height of the wind turbine. And Mr. Whitney asked that, or said that at some of the hearings he attended, some of the experts said that the sound could be heard for much further than that. He's asking why not a setback of 2 miles or something like that.
As Tom mentioned, there is a concern about exclusionariness. If we have provisions that become a de facto exclusion, that's a legal problem. In other words, we have to have physically possible locations to put wind turbines. And once you start doing a 2-mile setback from every single home, the question is, will there be any place we can physically put a turbine? And if not, we're in violation of state law.
And let me address that a little bit, because I don't want to get into the weeds on this too much, but there's two types, in the law, there's two types of exclusionary zoning. And the first one is de jure. I think it's a Latin term, I think I'm saying it correctly. But what that means is when you put in your ordinance, we don't allow gas stations in our township, or we don't allow adult bookstores, or we don't allow court. You specifically, explicitly state that you don't permit a use, or you just don't permit a use. That's de jure exclusionary zoning. Can't do it for a legitimate use. Municipalities at some point, after the court a number of times just looked at the ordinance and said, hey, you don't permit adult bookstores, that's exclusionary. Or billboards. I got burned on that in Temesing Township. There's 2 billboards on Route 209 that are there because the Commonwealth Court said our ordinance about 30 years ago was exclusionary. So, what townships got smart, municipalities got smart and said, all right, we're not going to allow adult bookstores. We're not going to say you can't have an adult bookstore. But what we're going to do is say you can't have an adult bookstore within 1,000 feet of a church. You can't have a adult bookstore within 1,000 feet of a school. You can't have them within 500 feet of a house. And then what would happen is the courts would draw circles with those diameters and go, all right, where could you have one after we do all this? That's called de facto exclusionary zoning. And again, I don't want to, both the Pennsylvania law frowns on, and they're both found unconstitutional, or can be found unconstitutional, and they create problems for the municipality. But I want to go into a little more detail. That there are, again, that's what Charlie's talking about. When people say to me, we want to have it 2 miles or a mile or things like that from various things, again, from any water body, from any residence and things like that, you take, in my mind, you take a compass. Everyone remember what compasses were in grade school? And you figure what the distance, you draw circles on a map and go, okay, if we do that, is this permitted in the township anywhere? Is there anywhere where it would go? And if it would not, then again, that would be attacked for that reason. And the last thing we want, and I think any lawyer, and I think Charlie would agree, the last thing you want is an ordinance that's exclusionary and it gets attacked because, I won't put it, but you don't want that. That is not the result you want. You want to be able to regulate it, because if you try to exclude it when your ordinance is found unconstitutional, you may not have those regulations that would have offered you protection, which you can get ahead of time. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay, and the other question was, who decides who the independent experts, professionals are that are going to do these studies, the sound study and the water quality study? Who's going to?
Tom, I don't think the township has the ability to choose the applicant's expert. I haven't seen that.
And I'm writing it down as an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I hear what Charlie's saying. The question that goes through my mind is, why can't we? But I don't know the answer to that. But I'm making a note of your question here, because depending on what we do here, that may be one of the things we look at. That good question. Like I said, hopefully we all learn things. So thank you.
Yeah, my name is John Fontaine. You know, the way I see this right now, if this were passed, it smacks of spot zoning. You're carving out a district for one specific use. Okay. Mr.
You want to use the microphone?
Although it doesn't reach.
Sorry.
Maybe if I get close.
Yeah, come over here. This might work better.
Right. And to Mr. Nanovik's point, he is correct about exclusionary zoning. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania is the most fractured state in the United States of America. And that being so, because we have so many municipalities, so many boroughs, cities, and once a township decides to incorporate and then decides that they want to enact zoning, they're governed by the municipality's planning code of Pennsylvania. And that's really the mother of all zoning. But with respect to the current issue at hand, this smacks of spot zoning. This is not an ordinance. This is an accommodation. The one question I have, this is an industrial use or a heavy commercial use. This is not in harmony with residential properties. There is no way, shape, or form this type of use ought to be in any residential district whatsoever. It's not in harmony. It's also contrary to the comprehensive plan of Carbon County. And there's no good for the community, none whatsoever. Nobody wants to live in a house and end up looking at a 600-foot monstrosity blighting their neighborhood. The other things that I have, which gentlemen before me touched on, is you keep bringing up the word independent, and I don't see independent in here, and that is a major issue. And to Mr. Nanovic's point, there is a resolution to that. If the applicant has the opportunity to pick all his own experts, he's cherry picking. He's picking who he wants, when he wants, and then you have to defend against it. Now, there are and have been many zoning cases that were heard on a common pleas level, and generally, when something like that arises, the judge will say, hey, I'm not an expert in this. I have no idea. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and we're going to get maybe 4 or 5 or whatever experts, and we're going to put their names in a hat, and we're going to draw them out independently, and then the applicant can pay for that and have it done, rather than cherry pick who they want to perform the analysis. So I think it's incumbent on the township to find somebody who is truly independent and not biased on behalf of the applicant. And you know, the appraisal portion, that's totally out of line. I don't even see the word use pattern being utilized in there. There's nothing in there that states that it's in conformity with the uniform standards professional appraisal practice. And the appraiser should be an MIA, a member of the Appraisal Institute, who can go under review by the appraisal board, so he doesn't have the option of dummying up as a reporter. And I don't see anything like that here.
I think that's a very positive suggestion.
Now, URDC, I believe your outfit's out of Bethlehem, if I'm not correct.
Yes.
Okay. And also in Bethlehem, I understand that they have an ordinance where they cap the height of turbines at 250 feet. And that ought to be looked into. And here you're pushing us up to 450 feet.
I have a copy of the Bethlehem ordinance.
I would just say that the main difference is you cannot achieve 1/3 mile setbacks from houses in the city of Bethlehem. You can't.
Sure you can. I live in Bethlehem.
Bethlehem City, there is always a house within 1/8 of a mile of any part of the city.
And we're talking about residential use property.
Right, we're talking that exactly. We're talking about residential use property here too. So, you know, if you're in an R1 or R2, whatever, you know, any of the residential zones, and this use is in there, what you're doing is you're creating a zone unto itself where it doesn't belong. It is not in harmony with a residential use. It has absolutely no business being in a residential district. And I know it's a workshop, so I just wanted to be brief. I just want to bring a few of those things up, but I don't see the word independent here. I don't see how the applicant can pick and choose because, for instance, you know, on the appraisal issue, the first time I ever encountered turbines was out in the desert in the bottom of Southern California. There's no houses around. There's no impact on anybody. They burn up, they fall apart, they break apart. You know, they're not going to hurt anybody. They're not injurious to anybody. So by this draft, they could go out, get an appraiser, he could go to the Mojave Desert and say, yeah, we're in a rural area. Yeah, there's not a house at 100 miles. And he's going to bring that report in and say it's beneficial. It's ridiculous. So like I say, it's an accommodation. You have to look, before you go any further with this, I suggest you look at Section 604 of the Municipalities Planning Code and start working for the residents. You need to promote, you need to protect the health, safety, and welfare. Not just protect it, you have to promote it. So there has to be some good in this project that benefits the residents, and I don't see it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Next. Do we have anyone on the list next?
He's Jack.
Right here.
I like things simple, and the way this seems to me is Mr. Nanovic is saying we can't oppose this because it may come up in court as unconstitutional.
No, let me correct that. No, I said you can't entirely exclude it. I didn't say oppose. I said entirely exclude it. And again, I used, well, I won't go through, everyone heard my examples, but I never said you couldn't oppose.
So,
there must be buildable locations somewhere in the township for every use.
Okay, it has to be an acceptable use.
Somewhere in the township.
Okay. So, and if you, let's say you say, well, this is not an acceptable use, then it's unconstitutional, so why are you bothering with this? This sounds to me like you're selling insurance, I'm sorry, but, you know, all those things I could have got from any website, from any wind company, all those things that you just said. Any one of them. I'm not sure that maybe you got them there, I don't know. But, also, my second part, I have a concern with low-level noise, which nobody's addressing. I worked for an industry for 40 years that had low-level, let's say, drone noise and machinery constantly. And we were told back in the 70s and the 80s, well, it's not over 45 decibels, so we don't have to do anything about it. You guys just go back to work. Well, we all lost our hearing. And some time in the 1980s, when our union and some government worker protection agencies got together and decided that low-level noise was not good and it wasn't healthy. So they issued all of us ear protection. But that didn't happen, and it was too late for me.
Called infrasound.
Thank you. So, I mean, shouldn't that be addressed also? Yes, we know it's not above 45 decibels. But there can be an annoying, constant drone, and you people are supposed to protect the community. I don't know who has a horse in the race, and I don't care. But you people are supposed to protect our community and our health. That's all I have to say.
Let me just. I know that certainly was an issue raised in the hearings, although I haven't read all the transcripts. We did add a provision on the middle of page 3 that the noise study must consider low frequency noise.
Consider.
Now, I just today, for the first time, found an ordinance that regulated low frequency noise. It's rare in ordinances across the country.
What does consider mean, please?
It needs to analyze it. And then, again, there can be conditions placed upon by the zoning hearing board to address issues that are raised.
Those conditions need to be in this ordinance.
That's something we can certainly look at. Again, it's not commonly addressed in zoning ordinances. I'm not saying it shouldn't be addressed, but it's not common.
Brought up in every residential area that has turbines by at least one family or several in a community that is forced to live near them. Always. Let's learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, for my learning, what did you call it? Low
Infrasound.
infrasound. How is that measured?
In decibels.
It's measured.
DBC.
It's measured in decibels, but it's not included in the 45.
Let me provide you with just a little bit of
Sure.
clarity.
Thank you.
So the ordinance is measuring in dBA, which does not, I don't want to say it doesn't include, but it does not focus on infrasound. dBA is not focused on infrasound. DBC, on the other hand, includes infrasound. So in other words, if you were to take a meter and listen to a sound, right, DBA is registering only what the human ear can hear. Infrasound is something that is can be felt. For instance, as an example, if you were in a concert and you may not be close enough to hear the music, but you can hear the thump, thump, thump on your chest from the bass speakers, that's infrasound, right? That's not your hearing, that's the actual infrasound. It's something that animals use to communicate over long distances, right? Elephants use infrasound to communicate over dozens of miles. So infrasound travels differently than sound that's in the range of the human hearing. And it can affect, according to the World Health Organization, it can affect people's sleep, and it needs to be considered and measured in the ordinance.
And Marcus, is it measured the same way? Is it 45?
There are ways it can be.
DBCs?
Well, you could measure something under DBC, right? And that could include the infrasound measure. And there are certainly ways to do that. And perhaps we need to engage the right level of expertise in order to get that type of measurement into the ordinance, because I don't know that URDC can provide that level of expertise. Perhaps there's another consultant they could suggest to get somebody like an acoustical engineer who could really give us a stronger ordinance that is more exacting in how we measure the sound.
And Marcus, I know you had provided us with an ordinance, and I provided that to Charlie. Is that addressed in there?
It is.
It is. Okay. Satisfactorily? I mean.
Well, it's to my satisfaction.
Okay.
However, I'm sure we need to explore that.
Okay. Thank you.
deeply.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So in regards to that.
Could you state?
Sure,
She's
sure.
trying to take minutes, so.
Diane Altieri. So in regards to that, if you measure prior to the construction of a wind turbine and you get your readings, how is that going to be affected, those readings affected when you clear the percentage of forestry, where that sound now is going to travel differently and potential of those readings being higher? Turbines have already gone up, or the forestry has already been plowed down, and that's going to affect those readings. What happens when those readings are now above?
They may have to shut down the turbines during certain conditions.
And
in order
that's
to meet the noise
certainly
standards.
something that I'd love to see in the ordinance, because there's no enforcement now.
They have to meet the noise standards, and there is periodic checking of the noise standards after.
We'll certainly address that.
So bear with me, because I wrote a lot of notes down. Diane, why don't you go
One at a time. Would you like to use the microphone? That would be helpful for everybody.
I need a breather because I need my notes. Excuse me. So, talking about the noise, the removal of trees having an impact on the noise. If we're measuring before trees go down and the measurement after, huge concern. Can't see it having a positive change.
Although distance is better for noise reduction than trees are.
Sure.
Trees help, but not distance is the major factor.
So somebody now living further away are going to be able to hear them, because you've removed trees where maybe at my residence I may not hear them if the trees were there, but now you take them down, I'm going to hear them further away. The letter S, in regards to the impact on birds and bats, you had made the comment that do not run the turbines or run them at a lower speed.
What I read was one of the recommended measures was to not run the turbines at low speeds, low wind speeds, because that's when the bats are most vulnerable.
Okay.
That's when it's most likely to throw off their sonar.
Okay. So, the slow speed of turbines. When you're reducing the speed for whatever the reasons, when grids are demanding power, like in the summer, when the turbines have to be turned down, then they're producing a small amount of unreliable power. So the wind output is going to vary substantially with our local, daily, monthly, and seasonal weather conditions. This trend favors cold nighttime periods from all the research that I've done, rather than hot summer late afternoons when the power is needed the most. So, intermittent outputs require access to a shadow capacity, which enables utilities to balance the power grids when the wind conditions are at optimum, which is most of the time. Wind constantly changes. So they have what they call the spinning reserve, and that spinning reserve must equal the total wind capacity, which are fueled in a different way. So when the wind is not blowing to spin these turbines, something else has to power these. And that's usually coal, gas, or the propane, or natural gas, I'm sorry. So ironically, that's what the turbines are supposed to replace. And then,
What I understand is there's some power plants that only operate when there's peak demand because they're expensive to run.
correct. So we have to consider the other methods of power that these turbines are going to be required to operate. They're not just operating by wind.
You need a mix of power in any system.
Okay. Just want that to be considered.
Next.
Next. Oh.
How are you? Can everybody hear me? You guys hear me all the time. I talk to you about different concerns. Nowhere in this does it mention health and safety, really. Shouldn't the ordinance do something about protecting the health and safety of the residents?
Yeah, can you go to the mic?
Yeah, because you're facing the wrong direction.
We tried to break health and safety into its components, but please. Okay.
Basically, what I asked is, should the ordinance address health and safety concerns for the community? It's nowhere in here. That was one. Also, with all due respect, I don't think you're a sound engineer, sir, and I don't believe you're an ornithologist. You keep saying it's common in other jurisdictions, it's common in other communities. I would venture to say that this community is unique unto itself. I mean, this is the migratory flight for eagles, all kinds of raptors. I mean, it's habitat for all kinds of stressed animals here, and we don't address any of that. And finally, my big concern is always the fire safety, and I would suggest that W, where we have local fire officials can comment, they should have to approve the plan. I asked at the Planning Commission about whether our firefighters are going to be required to go into turbines to rescue personnel if they're stuck there doing repairs and a fire happens. And I was told, no, they have a safety plan, but to my knowledge, no safety plan has been presented yet. It should be presented along with the application so that local firefighters can approve it, not just comment on it. We were talking about setbacks, and you said that you can't have an exclusionary setback, but if we have a health and safety concern over infrasound, setback should be a minimum of 1.5 miles, minimum. And that's about it for me. Thank you.
Next. Excuse me. Can you state your name for the record?
Jack Engelhardt.
Sam Trangone. I want to discuss a little issue with the construction of these turbines. And I think it can possibly affect every person in this room. Now, when they do the construction, there's blasting, there's drilling, anchor the turbines, blasting to level the platforms that they're going to be on. My concern is, I don't think anybody could really say yes or say no. Even if a hydrologist gave us a report on the structure, the aquifer, the bedrock and everything. But if by any chance the aquifer is ruptured and we now have contaminated water into our groundwater, now there's no way that water can be clarified. No way can we run a city water system up here in the mountains. Now, what about those, say the manufacturer says, oh, we'll take care of you. We'll give you a water tank. Okay, fine. You give me a water tank. You give everybody in this room a water tank. Who's going to maintain the tank? In the wintertime, who's going to pay for the electricity to heat the water in these tanks so it doesn't freeze? And I think this is a very, very serious issue. And I don't see, if it was in a really remote area, I could agree. I'm for wind turbines, but where they're supposed to be. Not in communities where you got so many residents and so many homes. Like in this area here, we have over 4,000 homes. And I'm not saying that more turbines are going to be put up here. But if they do, and the water does go bad, the company, most of them are LLC companies. All they got to do is go down the tubes. And who's stuck with it? We're all stuck with it. What are we going to do? That's about all I have to say. It's a big concern. I think, you know, if we had city water, okay, you got to run a new pipe to your house or something like that. What are you going to do? Run a new aquifer to your house? Thank you.
Did you sign it? Did you sign it?
I didn't sign it.
Okay.
I'll take that for you. I'll sign it.
Who's next?
Oh, no, please, go ahead.
Just a quick question, and kind of new to this.
Would you give your name for?
My name is Rob Lee. How are you? At the beginning, you said that these proposals will not affect any of the applications for windmills that are pending now.
That are currently, I believe there's one in the Court of Common Pleas and one in front of the zoning hearing board.
So
These
this will
not
have
affect
absolutely nothing to do
No.
with that.
Unless they are rejected.
Well, unless they start over. But those that are currently pending, correct, these would not affect.
If they are approved, one of the two, then this would not affect it. If those are denied and they come in for a third request, then this would affect it if it's adopted.
Okay, I just wanted
It's a grandfather clause. At the time you apply, it's whatever ordinances are in place on the date you apply.
Sorry if I wasn't clear about that. Mr.
Yeah, I have one more comment regarding what this gentleman said about water supplies. I request that you guys, and maybe everybody here, look up the Snedden Law report on private water supplies out of Scotland. It might even be the same company. I don't know. But I suggest everybody look into that and see what happens.
How do you spell Snedden?
S-N-E-D-D-O-N, I believe. S-N-E-D-D-O-N. Snedden Law
Report.
Water report. It's Snedden Law report on private water supplies.
Snedden Law.
Yes, Snedden Law, it's a community. Snedden Law report, if you Google it, you'll find it.
Thank you.
On private water supplies in an area in Scotland where the same thing happened, and they were told it was not going to affect their water. See what
Thank you.
I have a friend, the only reason I know about this is I have a friend that lives in Scotland and had to have water tanked into her horse farm after this project was done.
Can you kind of summarize what just happened there? Because we couldn't hear him 100%.
He said that there was a case in Scotland where there was water contamination, and he suggested we take a look at an online resource about that.
I have one more question.
I just want to tell everybody what I have observed.
Could you state your name, please?
Rosalie LaRusso.
And they'd like you to take the microphone. Can you come back here?
I'm not a rocket scientist, but I will tell you what I have observed. We took a trip in August cross-country to Seattle, Washington. Going out that way, when we got over by Wyoming, Montana, you look up, it's beautiful. All these wind turbines up there. There were no trees, but they're at the top of the ridge. Not one of those turbines was moving. They just sat there, and my daughter and I were amazed. And I don't get it. I don't get it. Now, another thing, we did see tractor trailers, double trailers, like 8 axles or whatever, carrying these turbines into different locations. Just the blade alone was huge. And I don't know how we would ever get them into the roadway where they want to put these turbines. It's not going to happen. The roads are not big enough. You can't do it. We're not made for it. We're not made for it. Like I said, this is just my senior citizen common sense. I don't know anything else, but I'm telling you what I saw. And one other thing I did hear on TV, I don't know what channel, I forget what news media it was. A community in Oklahoma, beautiful little homes, big homes, they all had wind turbines. They were suing the turbine company because it didn't produce enough electricity. So, there you go with that. And the other thing, they reduced it from 40 turbines to 20 turbines or 10, whatever. After you put those turbines up, where did the next 50 go to bring the electricity to New Jersey or wherever it's going? Where is it all going? Who gets it? I don't get it. Do you get it? I mean, I don't know. I have no idea where it's going. So, like I said, these are things we observed, and that was just in August this year on our road trip. So, okay, thank you so much.
Jack.
I just had one other question. Nowhere in the ordinance does it give the township recourse. If the sounds go above 45 decibels, how do we address that? What's the recourse? Are there fines? Do we shut them down? Once they're constructed, it's not like we're going to take them away. There's no recourse there. Suppose we have health effects from infrasound right away in the community. How do we address that?
Is that
I
something
think
that
we
can be
should really have some kind of means for recourse for citizens for the blacks that are in the ordinance.
Good question, Jack.
Can you speak to that, Mr. Schmaus?
Yeah, it can be addressed several ways, but I don't want to mislead you. It's not easy. When you violate a zoning ordinance or something, a special exception, the conditions and the special exceptions, the developer or the person violating the ordinance, they could be fined. It's up to $500 per day, so it can be substantial. And you can also go to court and get an injunction to order that they comply with the ordinance. But again, I don't want to mislead you. I've been involved in several of these cases regarding violations of zoning ordinances, and it's not always easy. If you're dealing with someone who's not cooperative, as oftentimes people or applicants are not, it can sometimes take years to get these violations corrected. But there are provisions in the law to address that. But again, I'm not going to mislead you. For any use, it's not always easy. I've been involved in a couple zoning cases that the person actually appealed to the United States Supreme Court twice. Here, one in this township and one in Temensing Township, and it takes several years sometimes until you get the relief that you want.
Is a recourse something that could be entered into this?
Excuse me?
Is recourse or ability to have a plan of recourse?
I don't know what more you would do than what already is provided for in the municipality's planning code, which someone mentioned earlier. That's the Bible for zoning. I don't know what more you would do than having the ability to fine them. And again, the fines can be substantial, up to $500 per day, which doesn't sound a lot. But if someone's in violation for a year or more, I've seen, not me personally, I've gotten fines over $30,000, $40,000, but I haven't personally I've seen fines, I think in some cases over $100,000. But again, that's only one method of means of relief. You can also go to court and again get a court to order that they come into compliance with the zoning. But I can tell you, like I said, it's not always easy. I had a case one time, went on for years. I actually inherited it. I practiced with my father. He's retired now, but when I began practicing in 1982, I practiced with my father. I inherited the case, and he had worked on it. I think my older brother might have worked on it. Another lawyer in the office had worked on it. Then I worked on it. What was happening is they were violating the zoning ordinance. We'd go to court. The court would order them to comply with the zoning ordinance. They would comply for 3 months, something like that. And we'd have to go back into court each time and file a contempt petition saying you're violating the order that the judge said that you had to comply with. And it took years till actually one or both of the people actually sat in jail at one point because they refused to comply with the ordinance. Eventually they did, but it can be very difficult. But there are methods of getting relief, again, through the state law.
We can look at that. We can look at that and see if there's something else that could be added to the draft.
Yep, I'm just getting in line here.
Thanks. My name is Bill Morrow. I live at 9 Maple Lane in Hickory Run Forest. And a quick question that I'd like to have answered or at least considered for the ordinance is, just how many applications are we supposed to entertain at one time? This is starting to get a little bit ridiculous, and I think we need to put a limit on that, and we should consider a moratorium on any other applications until we get our ordinance at a place where we all feel comfortable.
Okay. My name's Bob Rhodes, and I live in Penn Forest. And on page 1, 2B, why do you have the setback near water source so low?
Is that the 300 feet?
Yes, sir.
Normally there are protections for water quality in addition to setback. Normally there's different types of improvements that can be best management practices to protect water quality in addition to the setback. It's something we could look at increasing if you think it's needed.
It needs to be quadrupled.
Okay, we can look at that.
Why would you have a setback so low when you're building it on a watershed?
Yeah. We can look at that.
And then the next is just a comment. At the last hearing at the township building, I was being very observant of just the demeanor of the wind project speaker, and just the comments and the attitude and the overall arrogance. You think you're going to have a fight now? Wait until you have to find them. They're going to laugh in your face, and they're going to run to the bank.
To their foreign companies.
I actually had a question on the setback from.
Hi, my name is Judy. I've been at this, oh my God, since day one. We retired up here to have peace and quiet, but it's not following us. We have been fighting zip lines and pipelines and now turbines. It's never ending. They just want to take a beautiful place and destroy it. We all came up here for the same thing: peace, quiet, and beauty. We do not want to see 600-foot towering giants in our backyard. Not to mention the infrasound that will affect all of us. And it's known to travel over 50 miles. Who is going to monitor that? What if it affects our health? Who is going to pay for our health bills? Will you be responsible? Must we sue the township because we're sick from this or we lost value in our homes? Who's going to pay for all this? This is the questions that are future questions but are affecting us right now. My question, actually the initial question, was about the water course being only 300 feet from the perennial creek or a reservoir. That is ridiculous, as these turbines hold over 120 gallons of oil. What happens when one of those break and the oil spills? And it happens. Aren't you taking that in consideration? That's ridiculous. That has to be quadruple. Also, C, the owner of the facility shall completely remove all ground and structures within 12 months. What if they go bankrupt? Then what? Who removes them? They have been known to go into bankruptcy all over the country. They come from Spain. They have so many problems over there with just walking away from these wind farms. They walk and they don't do anything else. They come over to this country, they start all these LLCs. If you go online, you can see a bevy of them. They have all different names, but they're the same company. The same company. And they have been sued so many times over in Spain, it's incredible. My most concern is the value of our homes. You're going to have somebody come over here and tell us that maybe our homes won't be, that adversely affected. I was in real estate. That is a stigma. It's a stigma living next to a dump. It's a stigma living next to a, I guess you would say, one of those adult places you've been talking about all night, right? Your property becomes stigmatized. If you're within a mile or 2 miles, you're not going to sell your property. Nobody's going to want it. And who is going to pay for that difference that we have worked so hard all our life, all of us, and it will be destroyed. We will have nothing. And who's going to pay for that? Do we turn around and sue the township because you did not protect our property values or our health?
Yes.
Consider that, because that's what I think a lot of us would do. In essence, we're suing ourselves because we're paying all these taxes and we're not being protected. So we have these rights that have to be listened to. And I feel that they're not. I feel that corporations, they make their money, they leave, and we have nothing left. And a lot of us, we're not wealthy people, look at us. But these people here have heart, and they have been fighting this from day one, and they will continue to fight it as long as we can. And that's all I have to say.
Bravo. Okay. Your question? Oh, okay. I'm pretty loud, so I'm not gonna do the microphone. Catherine Seacrest. Yeah. Yeah, I think. Okay, so I just want to make this real quick because I'm really interested in hearing what Marcus has to say, being that he initiated this. Kind of just want to piggyback on what Judy just said. I'm on a learning curve here, and I hope none of my questions or what I direct toward you aren't appropriate for this venue, but I'm concerned that we have all these entities that are supposed to be protecting us, our environment, our health, our welfare, our investments. And so far what I'm experiencing is that they're letting us down. And, you know, we're looking at Bethlehem Water Authority, who's supposed to have the best interest in protecting the water, has now become so corrupt that they're allowing possible wind turbines blasting that it doesn't, you don't have to be a specialist in these things to understand that there are risks to the water people are drinking in Bethlehem, to our water. It's pretty common sense to me that this is probably not a proper setting of this. I want to know, you had mentioned that we didn't want to have an exclusionary suit. Is there no other place, has it already been done, there is no other viable place within the township where these could be within 1.5 to 2 miles? And do we have to have it be available for 20 or just 1?
There's no hard and fast rules. We have to, it cannot be token in size. It has to be a buildable location.
1 turbine.
It has not been litigated to my knowledge. I'm not an attorney.
I haven't seen it litigated either.
Okay, so I don't think that we should be walking on eggshells for exclusionary if we haven't properly done our homework to see
exclusionary has been litigated numerous times.
No, I'm saying within our township, if there's a viable place to put 1 turbine, 5 turbines, whatever we feel comfortable with, why are we saying, well, we're just going to set these setbacks at this because we don't want to be exclusionary? If there is a viable location within this township that they can put 1 to 5 or whatever we feel comfortable with, we should make that setback 2 miles.
The one limitation is it cannot be token in size. So if in the entire township, you only put up 1 turbine, I think that would be token. But I can't tell you how many, you know, common court would decide.
All right, well then let's say, okay, 5, if we do 5 wind turbines, look at our, I mean, you're an urban planner, look at the map. Is there somewhere to put 5 wind turbines and they'll be 2 miles from everybody's property?
How many are at Bear Creek? 10 maybe, until one burned out and it was out for a year.
How many are in Lehigh? They said no. How come they got to say no?
Yeah, how about? And that's my understanding. I'm trying to get up to speed here. I understand. I think it's the state of Ohio or something. Like basically has blocked these things from the entire state. Where's this exclusionary? Where are they getting sued? Maybe I don't know.
Well, the state can do whatever they want.
We need to be protective of the residents. My first concern walking in here when you gave your name and I looked you up is that you're from Bethlehem. You work in Bethlehem. Why are we going to an outfit in Bethlehem? We know the whole thing's corrupt. Everybody's in everybody's back pockets. There's no way this would ever have been entertained.
I'll tell you what, this isn't talked about in Bethlehem.
Yep. Oh, it's gonna be.
The city residents of Bethlehem would shoot this down.
Let me just interject. I had thought up until this moment, seriously, that this was a very good meeting where we were getting constructive comments. I don't think attacking people and alleging people. Wait. You're saying it's all corrupt. I don't know of anyone that was sitting at this poor board here who has gotten a payoff or is in the back pocket of anybody. So I would seriously hope that before you make those allegations and defame people, that you have some evidence of that you could show us? Because that's not fair to any of the, that's not any of the, it's a very difficult job for the planning commission.
I get that.
No, please, let me finish, because you've made spurious allegations, they're absolutely untrue. I know I'm not corrupt, I'm not getting paid by anybody other than the township, $125 an hour, I believe, to be here. So I think before you're gonna make allegations like that in a public meeting, that some people might think you know what you're talking about, you don't. So
Okay.
I'm not gonna ask personally for
that somebody
wait.
in Bethlehem Water Authority is getting paid. We're not gonna know that,
Well,
Mr. Danovich.
but you just said that we all know this is corrupt. I don't know this is corrupt. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, the perception, which is reality at this point, is that this is a corrupt process.
Well, again, I thought we were having a very good meeting. I thought it was very constructive. I know when I went to the planning commission, I said this to the audience there. I thought the comments that were made were very constructive. I know I learned a lot. I'm learning a lot this evening. I don't learn a lot from people making wild allegations of conspiracies and corruption. But yeah, because I think some of your points were very good, but then you take away from it by then saying things like you said. Can't we just stay on point?
Well, I started out with the fact that I do not trust any longer in the entities that are representing our best interests. That was my initial comment.
That's fine.
And that goes on the heels of it, and why I don't trust those any longer. I would just like to know from the board, was there a decision made to hire a planning person from the very entity that we're fighting? The same area, that there could be some sort of, I mean, where else are there urban planning? Why are we going with Bethlehem? It's just not good judgment. That's the comment.
It just doesn't feel independent. That's
No.
the point.
And then, Mr. Schnell, have you researched the impact to the water? Because I know a lot of the things you were saying, you're like, well, as I researched this, because you're kind of just coming to learn about the effects of these things, it seems like, during this process.
I mean, I've worked with these issues for 20 years. I've done more research for this project than I have in the past.
Okay, so, I mean, what are the water impacts that you have come across?
I haven't come across a contamination from a wind turbine. I'm not saying it didn't happen, I haven't come across it. You always want to be preventative, and you always want to have the right mechanisms to avoid it, and I think the suggestion for larger setbacks from creeks and the reservoir is a very good suggestion.
Okay, can we enter into this zoning ordinance any of the recourse that was mentioned before? Is that even possible?
You can have reasonable conditions and reasonable standards as long as it's still a buildable location. In general, I'm not an attorney, but usually the judges, when they review these things, they defer to the municipal officials of legislative discretion, and they assume the legislative officials know what they're doing unless the applicant can prove that it's unreasonable. So things like setbacks, public health and safety standards usually survive a challenge.
Okay, but there's nothing in here. Is there a reason that we didn't? That's
Well,
not in
we're
here
open to suggestions.
Okay. And then is also, as Bill mentioned, is there a possibility of getting a moratorium from that? Saying that they're.
I'm not an attorney, but my understanding is there was a Commonwealth Court case in it was Delaware County that said moratoriums are not legal in Pennsylvania.
I am an attorney. I made a note when that was brought up earlier. I am going to take a look at that.
I think it was Naylor.
I think that's my recollection. There used to be a provision in the MPC that you could declare a moratorium. I think they took that out of the MPC. Well, I think they found it unconstitutional. But I am going to look at that.
The municipal exclusionary challenge provision is still in the planning code, but the moratorium.
That's correct. But I think the ability to declare a moratorium. I think there used to be a specific provision 25, 30 years ago, and they took that out. And I think you're correct. I think there was a case that, but I did make, it's my note, I don't see it here.
I think it was Naylor.
It's my note number 10, moratorium, to take a look at it.
I think it was NAYLR. I think it was out of Delaware County.
That's all I have.
NAYLR.
I'm a little uncomfortable
addressing a lot of people. But there was a lady up here that said about removing 10% of the trees. I was here for all the meetings, every meeting, even when we went to Jim Ford and something I would like to add to what she said. When the first night, the wind turbine people gave testimony, and it lasted all night. And they said that it would be under 45 decibels. And the infrasound wasn't really brought up. But they had a time period of like 30 days or whatever. There was a time period where the wind turbines were in a flat area like Kansas City, or you understand, flat, open ground. And they did a time-weighted appraisal of the decibels. And sometimes they were higher, sometimes they were lower. And the problem is, they used that information and they gave testimony to that. The problem is, we don't have flat ground. Our ground oscillates up and down, and it's ridges and valleys, and which causes turbulence in the air. And the turbulence increases the decibels and the infrasound. Because we had people, experts, that gave testimony to that fact. Now, I don't believe that they will be able, my personal opinion, I do not believe that they will be able to maintain less than 45 decibels. And I don't know much about the infrasound, which causes sleep apnea and people, you know, it causes all kind of medical difficulties. Now, my question to the solicitor is, the zoning board went past the 45-day maximum between meetings. Does the wind turbine people automatically get the wind turbine approval? And I would like to ask the solicitor that question. In other words, we're supposed to have a meeting in less than 45 days. From what I understand, the zoning board solicitor allowed them to go over the 45 days. Do they automatically get their approval for the wind turbines? Yes, yes, I am.
Yeah, and I'll be very brief. That's not the purpose of the meeting tonight. The meeting tonight is to discuss the zoning ordinance. The simple answer to his question is no. That is currently pending in the Court of Common Pleas. To Mr. Malich and I believe Mr. Mangle is the other name. I've never met the two gentlemen, but they appealed, and that is currently pending before the Court of Common Pleas. But that's all I want to say about that, because this meeting is not, and that's why I said in the beginning, this is not about that. It's about this zoning ordinance. But again, the answer to your question is no.
No, it does not automatically give them approval?
No, it's currently pending in the Court of Common Pleas.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi folks, my name is Frank Ola. I'm happy to be here tonight to give a little bit of testimony, but it's just a brief question in reference to the new zoning ordinance and maybe a proposal of some other item that would help the existing zoning ordinance. At this point in time, and everybody has been talking about what will happen when they begin construction, what will happen after construction, what are we going to do, how do we propose it. Right now, my well is good. Right now, the creek behind my house ebbs and flows depending on the weather. Right now, the sound is consistent depending on the weather, the birds, anything out there. My proposal is if we take an exemplary reading of all these things at this point in time and say this is the standard that we've been living by at this point in time. And if something should change, then there's no discussion about what made the change. The change is the new construction of the turbines, the new construction of the roads, and the change in the aquifer. I will guarantee you this, that if they didn't do this, if I don't have a standard sound, if I don't have my well already saying that it's good, if my property values have not been already stated, then I will tell you, they says, you prove it. You prove that we did this.
There's nothing to measure.
There's nothing to measure against. Let's set the standard now. And this doesn't have to be a new thing for the ordinance. We could do that now. And we could put it in the next one. Look, take a reading out there for our wells. You can do that. I still get my 5, 6, 7 gallons per minute. That creek still looks clean at right now. Our little lake is being filled up. The sound is not driving us crazy. I don't have no light flutter. So why not do something like that right now? And then if anything should change, we have our standard and we say, hey, this is what it was. The only thing that changed was the new construction. Thank you.
Hi, Marcus Lawrence. So, in the spirit of trying to make constructive comments, I only got this ordinance yesterday, so I'm going to ask just to ensure that we have the proper time to really dig into this ordinance, that we certainly continue this meeting, because I don't have enough time. I only got this morning, and that's not enough time to really look at this change properly. But that said, I have some changes here that I was able to write up. And before I get into that, though, I will talk about the zoning ordinance in the town of Bethlehem. So when we talk about what's a token and what's not, and what's exclusionary and what's not, the zoning ordinance in Bethlehem looks strikingly similar to the ordinance that was proposed. So I'm assuming that URDC did their ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. So URDC saw fit to change or set up the Bethlehem ordinance with a limit of 250 feet. That's already been covered. But also, I think what's important is that no turbines are allowed in a residential district, none, in the township of Bethlehem, for the city of Bethlehem. So we can certainly, that's the first change that I would suggest, is that we change what is allowed to be in a residential district. I am aware of the perils of exclusionary zoning. And I think that with the proper work, we can come up with a setup for this township where the any proposed turbines could be placed in some type of commercial district that does not impact or has a minimal impact on residential areas. Because certainly a setback of 4 times 250 feet, I'll bet you we would be able to find something where we could perhaps do some business. So maybe 450 is too much, and maybe we need to do what Bethlehem City did and lower it to 250 and take it out of the residential district. If it's good enough for Bethlehem, it's good enough for me. So that's just one change. Also, if we look at this ordinance 54A, nearest existing occupied dwelling needs to change to property line of another lot, right? Because really, the occupied dwelling, that makes no sense. What about the people with empty lots? Are they not going to be able to build in the future or enjoy their property? That makes no sense to me. So we need to actually do these setbacks from property lines, not occupied dwellings. Sound measurements is a whole nother subject, but setbacks should be done from property lines. I should be able to enjoy every ounce of my, or every acre, or every inch of my property. Let's see. And dwelling should be changed to property owner in 54A. As far as the maximum setbacks, we've had a lot of discussion today. I'd like to see a mile, but certainly we have to worry about exclusionary zoning, but we need to dig in that a lot deeper, a lot deeper. 54A1, this needs to be struck in its entirety. This is way too close to any road. Ice throws can travel over 1.5 times the tip of the turbine height. Travel the road over the ridge in Mahanoy, and go to the people of Mahanoy and talk to them, because I have. I've spent days going to Mahanoy Township and interviewing residents and interviewing people that live close to these turbines in Mahanoy, and I'll tell you, one of the things they talked about is the amount of snow that gets thrown off of the turbine, snow and ice, and lands on the road that you have to drive around, the road that goes over the ridge. So something to think about. 54A1 should be struck in its entirety. 54B, change base to the edge of the turbine pad. The base of the turbine, these pads can be anywhere up to 100 feet around. So when we talk about the base of the turbine, that's not the same as the base of the construction. And also this only addresses the water for Bethlehem. It talks about the water in the reservoir. It makes no mention of the water tables for the wells. So we need to change 54B to address the turbidity of the groundwater and any changes in the turbidity of the groundwater due to the vibrations of the turbines. 54C, strike the word above ground. There's no reason why we shouldn't have them remove everything, including the bases. Why are we allowing them to leave 100 foot around of concrete? That makes no sense to me. If we're going to have them remove things, we should have them remove everything.
And replace.
Well, and that certainly can be addressed, right? We need to dig into that more. So strike the word above ground. That's just a start. 54E, safety matters is not defined. We need a good definition of that. 54N, strike in addition, an accessory building may house necessary maintenance. That's legislating this prior project into existence. That was one of the major issues with the prior project. That smacks of spot zoning. 54P, change 45 A-weighted decibels to C-weighted decibels from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and 30 C-weighted decibels from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Because what we all know is that the sound of a whisper while you're trying to sleep is very different than the sound of a whisper during the day when you're carrying on your own conversation. The sound levels need to be lower at night, absolutely positively, and that is established science. The perception of sound at night is very different than the perception of sound during the day. The crack of a branch when you are sleeping in a tent will wake you up, right? So we know that there's a difference. 54P, letter B, change all required noise studies and testing shall be completed by a qualified independent professional specializing in noise analysis to all required noise studies and testing shall be completed by a township engineer or qualified acoustical consultant as appointed by the township. This has been brought up, I'm just going to say it again. We should be choosing the experts, period, end of sentence. Nobody should be cherry picking their data. 54P1, strike and replace, strike the entire thing and replace with the, I'm not going to read the entire item that I have there, it's too long. But it's certainly more thorough than what you have. It goes on to the next page. Item 9, 54P2, strike and replace. This really talks about the testing. 5 years? I don't know where that came from, but if there's a problem, I don't want to wait 5 years to address it. We should be testing on an annual basis, or at the very least, when a resident can provide reasonable proof that the ordinance is being violated. We should not be waiting 5 years to test the equipment. That seems completely unreasonable. Item 10, 54Q, change on lot to per project. So really an entire project, when you're talking about one lot, these projects often have multiple lots. So we shouldn't be just delineating that to a single lot. We should talk about an entire project and how it affects the community. 54R, strike if an applicant involves more than 4 wind turbines. That number 4 seems arbitrary. I'm not sure why that even matters. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 3. It allows an applicant to come in and just build them 3 at a time and avoid the entire process. Makes no sense to me. There should be, if it's 1 or 100, if it's an industrial use, we should be applying the same standard. If they're only building 2, we don't have to worry about anything. Makes no sense. 54S. Let's see. Oh, you know what? And one other thing, I'm sorry. Add language that disqualifies a project for negative impact on groundwater. We talk a lot in this ordinance about the way we can mitigate things, but nowhere in here does it seem like we have the ability as a township to strike down an application if it violates any pieces of this ordinance. It just allows the applicant to come into a way to mitigate it, which we don't really know what that means because there's no standard set. And so then we still have to let them move forward because they've mitigated it, but nobody's defining mitigate. Let's see, 54T, strike and replace, shadow flicker. Okay, so to say shadow flicker, we're just going to consider it, again, makes no sense to me. What is enough? Like, how many houses have to be affected before it becomes a problem? There's no actual standard in the ordinance. So if it's 1 house, why did they just have to have a report and say, well, we might mitigate it? What does that mean? What if it only affects my house for an hour or a year? Is that good enough? I don't understand. What if it affects my house for 2 hours, 3 hours? What's the standard? And I'll tell you, I've done a lot of reading on shadow flicker. And depending on the angle of the sun and the time of the year, and I'll tell you, a lot of houses in this township are built with glass fronts. We are full of A-frame A-frame buildings with glass fronts. The typical response that we've seen in previous applications was that people should buy blackout blinds. Is that what mitigation means? Blackout blinds on my entire glass front of my house? I think not. So what does mitigation really mean? Because mitigation to me is it doesn't exist. We should not have to deal with shadow flicker on any piece of property because a lot of the homes in this area cannot mitigate the effect of shadow flicker. They're built with glass fronts. So there's that. 54U, strike this in its entirety. I am perturbed that we passed by this. I am not going to speak to the credibility of anybody that's sitting in front of me, but I am questioning the fact that this was a major item in previous applications, and it was a complete change to the ordinance, which you seem to go over all the other ones, but completely blew by this one. This should be struck in its entirety. And that's all I have to say. There is no reason to allow for 2 ordinances to say it's common. I would love to see where it's common. I'm betting it's common where there's wind turbines. That's what I'm betting. Strike versus replace, 54V. I won't go into the detail there. It's too much to read. You can certainly review that, and we'll look at that at another working group. W, strike and replace with what I've provided. Again, to say that there is the fire official gets to comment on a report without providing really strict details around, and this, what I provided is not strict. It's just a basis for what a report would look like. There is no reason why this level of detail can't be written into the ordinance. And let's see, that was WV, 54V. The property value, somebody's already talked about this. The way that that was written is big enough to drive a Mack truck through. There's holes in that suggestion. I mean, we could bring in anywhere in the United States, but nobody mentions, you said rural. Nobody mentions the similar population density. What does rural mean? How many homes are in the area? How many of those were affected by the wind turbines? And then really talking about not averages. There's no parameters. There's nothing to stop an applicant from coming in and saying, well, overall, the homes in this township weren't affected because you take an average. I'm really interested in how far away were they, right? And looking at specific homes that were affected. So we need a lot more detail. My suggestion is merely a beginning. And in 54W, change may to shall, because there's no question in 54W, we need to mitigate or we need to address the ice flows. That's not a may, that's a shall. Things freeze up here. I think we all know that. This is not the desert. We need to address ice. That is just the beginning of what I would suggest to change. There are many other things that I won't cover tonight that I can cover in further working groups. Do you have any questions about my suggestions?
I don't.
I do not, but thank you.
Thank you. You know what? I only
scan
bought
it.
one for you guys.
I can scan it and send it out to the township.
And I have the best one ever. Ordinance too. I got it. Oh, you do?
I'll scan that and send it
Real
out.
quick question, you know about the B&W?
Butch just pointed out to me, we have 15 minutes yet tonight. Any more questions or comments? And sure, come on up. Come on, we're all here, so come on up. Why don't you come up?
Just about the B&W, that there's two B's and two W's there. What's up with that? Why isn't there AA or Z?
Marcus, why didn't you catch that?
Because I only got this today, which is a whole nother problem.
Yeah,
Covered another meeting.
thank you. Thank you. Are there any other comments? Yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Two U's and two W's, absolutely.
Can I just talk for a minute?
Yeah.
My name is Catherine Cintron, and my question to all of you, I mean, everybody's pretty much covered everything. I think the safety of these things really has to be well researched and well written. You have companies coming in trying to build other things, and you have no problem adding on costs for safety. We need our safety taken care of in this, for sure. Water. We know from testimony, the aquifer will be destroyed, and there will be no water, according to the testimony I heard. Okay, does that mean that everybody who has a well now has standing? Because we may all lose our water. So standing may not be just because how close you are to what they propose. Another question I have, as communities, we've had to put up a lot of money in escrow for if anything happens to our lakes, to our property, whatever, and it goes into escrow. Can we do that with companies who are doing these kinds of projects, and there's possibilities we're going to be left holding the bag? Can they have to put up money in escrow in the event that XYZ happens, you know, this money set aside for XYZ up front before anything starts?
I was just going to say, there's limits on that. There's some things you might be able to do, but we can't require large escrows for every conceivable hazard.
I've never seen that, nor have I read any cases in Pennsylvania where that's been permitted. And the same thing would actually apply to so many other uses. You know,
Basically, our water supply.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate what you're saying. We do need to look at that, but just your question about putting money up for escrow. Again, I do quite a bit of this type of work. I've never seen a case discussing it, nor have I gone to a seminar or anything like that. And like I said, I can see one of the issues would be where do you draw the line, because McDonald's is going to come next. You know, I don't want to start a rumor that this is not true. It's hypothetical. But if McDonald's is going to open next to me, I want money in escrow, or a body shop. But I understand your point about, and the water is obviously a major concern.
Maybe there's some other way that
Right.
you can have some sort of recourse that's not just somebody's word for it, or maybe we'll get to it later.
DEP has a process, for instance, when you build a quarry, you have to provide certain guarantees that if you disrupt the water supply, you have to deal with it. You have to make them whole somehow. So maybe there's something we could copy off of that.
What more we can do there?
This lady here is yours. We'll get to you.
Okay,
like that other gentleman this evening, I'm kind of anxious and nervous in front of other people. Nowhere in this document have I seen anything about rain runoff from the construction. If you gentlemen would like to review, you can look in the morning call sometime around after April 1972. I used to live on 3005 block of Huron Street in southwest Allentown. Up 30th Street, it used to be wooded, and then somebody purchased the land and went to put apartments up on it. They're carving out of the side of the mountain. And this particular rainstorm caused the street next to my house to turn into a raging river. And every place where there was another side street, the water runoff took the opportunity to move into that outlet, and everywhere on these streets there was mud, sand, debris, smaller pebbles, and even larger rocks brought down by this water. This part is a little sensitive to me. I was watching this water lap up over the curb and into our yard, and I was like 4 feet into the yard from the curb, and I could see my feet sinking into this established lawn from all this water that had to be absorbed. So I would like to see some sort of reference to how to prevent water runoff.
Residents at Locust Ridge have experienced this, and there are streets at Locust Ridge that completely flood. There's at least one home that I know of that has had to do water mitigation as a result of that project.
Just as a question to you, something that had occurred to me, was there any kind of interference with their septic systems?
I can't answer that question. I can certainly speak to shadow flicker and the runoff, because we did have conversations with residents at that particular wind farm.
Okay, let me just clarify a point. The reason why stormwater is not addressed here is because it's addressed in the subdivision and land development ordinance. And I forget if you have a separate stormwater ordinance in this township. I guess not. I think it's all in subdivision. So what happens is with any project that increases stormwater runoff, the township engineer is involved and they have to approve the stormwater management plan. In general, you cannot increase velocities, you cannot increase peak runoff. You have to do some type of detention and infiltration so that you do not cause increased stormwater hazards to your neighbors. That applies to any development, which is why it's not specifically called out in this amendment.
It's already spoken of.
Let's take one more comment. It pushes out. Yeah, we'll take one more.
I think people can hear me. But anyway, I was late to coming in. In this.
Can I just stop you for a second? Ma'am, can you give the secretary your name?
What was your name, please? Anita Stroll.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, I was late coming in, so I don't know if this was covered. With all the questions and advice that you have gotten tonight, do you have any timeline on when you would be finalized with this ordinance? Or is it going to continue into a year or two? What is your timeline if you set one?
We don't have a timeline. I did say, if you missed it, that from the point where we have a final draft of an ordinance, which obviously we don't have, from the point we have a final draft of an ordinance, it would be at least another 90 days until we were able to adopt that ordinance. But based on the comments we got tonight, I think we need to do a little more homework and look at this a little more. And before we end the meeting, I'll give this back to Butch, but I just want to say on behalf of the board and Charlie and the Planning Commission, this was really a constructive meeting, and I sincerely mean that. I just want to thank everybody. I think it was a wonderful meeting. I think it's great that everyone gets together and had this input. And I learned at the Planning Commission from some of the comments that how intelligent everybody was about this particular issue. So again, on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you. But let me hand this back to Butch.
We have one more. We have one more.
Can we get one more? Can we get one more? Butch? That's okay. You're the chair. You're the chairman, not me.
One more. Thank you very much. My name is Phil Malich. I've been actively involved in the previous application that was filed for this topic. And just a couple of comments or questions for Mr. Schmale. Marcus, of course, is a tough act to follow. I think he did a great job with a lot of the suggestions that he made. I've read a lot of ordinances and wrote a lot of ordinances myself over the years. So I'm not going to get into the technical requirements, 450 versus 250. I certainly am not I don't have the expertise to speak to that. But there are some things in the draft, I think, as a jumping off point, I would call them non-negotiable items. The first is the issue of two principal uses being allowed on a lot in a residential zone. It's an extremely common section that in residential zones you do not allow more than one principal use. You can have more than one principal use on a lot in the township, and you can do that in commercial and industrial zones. So if the board is looking at that as a prerequisite for this type of a use, then you need to look at are your commercial and industrial areas appropriate for the use, and do you need to do a map change? Because what you're going to end up doing is reverse engineering a residential zone that is sensitive, and there's a lot of people here that have a lot of legitimate concerns, into a quasi-commercial zone. And that's just not appropriate. The second issue is with respect to the sound. I mean, that's one of there's like three things here that I think are the biggest concern, and I don't mean to minimize anyone's sort of secondary, tertiary concerns, but the sound obviously, flickering, and property values. And as far as the sound goes, I agree with Marcus, like a 5-year window to monitor sound seems like it's a really long time. And if someone's having an issue, I mean, imagine waiting 5 years to get your car fixed. I mean, that the mechanic's just telling you, oh, tomorrow. I think that's something that really needs to be looked at. The way that I could break this down from a practical standpoint is that if an applicant comes in with a project like this, they have to do a baseline study for homes within a certain area. And these are your pre-construction sound levels. We do it with traffic counts all the time, where after construction we have to go out and do post-development traffic counts. So this should really be like an annual thing, where they put money in escrow, or there's a letter of credit posted, and the township is able to hire a professional to go out and do post-construction sound modeling, just to make sure that the project is staying in compliance with the proposed ordinance. As far as the more than 4 turbines, those sort of those phrases in the ordinance, I agree with Marcus. I think that is kind of an arbitrary number. I mean, if it's a principal use, it's a principal use, and those elevated levels of requirements should apply to that project. And I think just the wording in general here is dangerous, because it's worded that the application that includes 4 turbines, not, so you could have multiple applications, 4, 4, 4, 4, and you have a total project of 16 turbines. And if it's sliced and diced the right way, they could avoid, an applicant could avoid all of those requirements. The last thing that I would say about any proposed ordinance changes, is that these are specific criteria. So I generally have concerns with qualitative requirements in specific criteria. If you have a specific criteria for something like DBC levels, like Marcus was talking about, or infrasound, it can't just, I would recommend that it doesn't just say the applicant should consider or shall consider, because that is so open-ended. There really has to be some due diligence done to look into what is a reasonable requirement to keep, quite frankly, make people feel comfortable and give them some sense of security as far as it goes. So we really need to evolve a lot of these. I think there's good ideas here, but they really need to be evolved to include some more specifics in the ordinance.
Let me just, those are good points. Let me just mention two quick things. One is, I recommend to the board that we do a second draft before we have another meeting. And I'm sure people will take a look at that.
And make it available to people more than a day before?
Yes.
Certainly.
And can future meetings be held just for residents? Because we all know that there are people here taking fastidious notes about how they're going to meet or challenge our zoning. So it's really for the residents, right? So can we limit it, the meeting to just residents of Penn Forest Township and selected guests?
First of all, I don't know if we can do that, but secondly, I wouldn't recommend that anyway. I truly do believe that it is good to get input from everybody, and I'm not offended if there's people here who, whatever side you're on, that's fine with me. I think, like I said, we're all learning, and the point is to get the best ordinance we can get. That's the sole purpose. So even if we could do that, I wouldn't recommend that.
The last point I wanted to make was, one of the problems we have in this township is our industrial districts are extremely small, and our commercial districts, for the most part, are very narrow. So we don't have a lot of room, unlike Bethlehem, where they have the Bethlehem Steel properties, the former Bethlehem Steel properties. We have much thinner areas.
I understand that, but the point is that then the board should be looking at a map change, because you can't. You should not be reverse engineering residential zones to build in what requirements that are typical of commercial and industrial districts. It's just not appropriate. A simple example is, anyone in this room that owns a property, you can't build a guest house that you're going to rent out to a tenant on your property, because that's a second principal use. And so, that's not allowed, and it's a very, it's a very common requirement that in residential zones do not allow more than one principal use. And so if I agree that the township may need to look at the map and make sure that where you can have more than one, that those areas are adequate, and that may require a map change. But what I'm concerned with on behalf of everybody is that you're kind of backdooring your way into a map change here by incorporating a requirement like that.
Good enough for Bethlehem, good enough for
I want to thank everyone for coming in this evening. And if you do have anything you want to email to the township, you can do that. And have a good evening. We're going to adjourn right now. Okay?